Let me introduce our speaker, who just arrived here in the Philippines. She's still actually next door to me. Zuzanna Kowalczyk is a PhD student at the Department of Archaeology, Adam Mickiewicz University, in Poznan, Poland. Her doctoral project is focused on the landscape of the Dewil Valley in Palawan, in El Nido. She is particularly interested in the theory of archaeology and visualization and spatial documentation methods. All right, so without further ado, we would like to welcome Ms. Zuzanna Kowalczyk.
So once again, thank you for having me, and I would just like to stress that this research is quite preliminary and I haven't done much field work yet. So it will be more like theoretical considerations about the concept of landscapes. And I would like rather to ask some questions for the discussion than answer them. And I will be very happy to hear any critics and any new ideas or opinions. And also you can interrupt me if there is something wrong with the voice or anything. So I will start with somewhat obvious claim that archaeology is derived largely from the European and American intellectual traditions. And the archaeological research conducted in Africa, Asia, America, or Oceania in the 19th century and most of the 20th century was associated with colonial and imperialist discourses. And although nowadays we can observe the process of Asianization of archaeology and anthropology, the methodology and interpretations of the past are still dominated somehow by Eurocentric visions. Archaeological interpretations can be seen as one of many models of perceiving the world. However, we may ask some questions. Is the European ontology applicable elsewhere in the world? What is the sense and purpose of its application? Do indigenous ontologies show a different perspective with maybe a distinct interpretative potential? And what role does archaeology play in these local discourses? And are such Western approaches applicable to the interpretation of the past ontologies and to creation of present-day landscapes? So I will try to make an attempt to answer these questions. And this case study of the Dewil Valley is just a starting point for a broader humanistic reflection on the landscape ontologies. So in this presentation, I would like to present some local and indigenous visions of the environment and somehow confront them with archaeological knowledge. And I would like also to take a critical look at the concept of the landscape and the perception of space in the Western paradigm, and try to indicate some maybe relationships between these ontologies and some theoretical approaches. So let's start with the concept of the landscape in social sciences. In the common discourse, the landscape is often associated only with the visual and material domains of the world. And the word landscape itself, in its modern form, was first used in the 16th century, and it depicted a trend in Dutch painting of natural sceneries. The landscape as an art form and landscape of scientific interest has common historical roots. However, this concept also carries a range of culturally specific assumptions because it refers to a visual phenomenon. It implies the existence of the view and the viewer, and it also has an aesthetic value. Hence, some new definitions introduced, for example, by Daniels and Cosgrove, that the landscape is a cultural image and a pictorial way of representing or symbolizing surroundings. And also in geography, the landscape for many years was just equated with what can be seen. And as with the painted pictures, the geographic landscapes and maps introduce a distance between the outsider and the insider. And definitions relating to the visual landscape result in very physical and materialistic understanding of space. And thus the landscape can be seen as a tangible image, something that can be drawn or mapped. And I think archaeology is still dominated by this way of describing and studying the landscape. So topography, landforms, elevation models, outlines of some archaeological structures, and the range of the sites are becoming the most important features in archaeological remains. However, as a part of some postmodern archaeology, some different concepts emerged in response to this very visual and materialistic approach. So then the landscape appears as a concept that includes also non-physical aspects of the world. For example, Hirsch defines landscape as an ongoing cultural process by which people locate themselves in the world, and there are some existential spaces and dynamics that are changeable. Another very popular concept was presented by Tim Ingold in his article, the temporality of landscape. And he adapted the concept of dwelling from the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. And according to this concept, people dwell in the world and produce and reproduce some relations through practically engaging with their physical surroundings. Another approach was presented by John Wiley, who defines the landscape as a product of interactions between some sets of natural conditions, such as climate or geological processes, and cultural practices, such as agriculture or religious beliefs. So in his view, nature plus culture equals landscape. This landscape, understood by Wiley, is a tension between different factors. However, Wiley also notes that thinking of nature and culture as distinct and independent realms is problematic, both in theory and practice. So then comes, for example, Bruno Latour, who raised a similar problem in his book, We Have Never Been Modern. And he argues that the modernist distinction between nature and culture never existed. And he claims that natural and social phenomena, as well as the discourse about them, are connected as hybrids and should be studied as a whole. Therefore, the landscape would be defined as a network of some relationships that exist despite the scale, space, place, or time. And in this view, these relations also involve humans and non-humans. And another last perspective I wanted to mention is the phenomenological approach, and based on the rejection of Cartesian model of cognition, in which human is reduced to disembodied cognizing mind. So according to Christopher Tilley, the physical human body is essential research tool because we are all bodily immersed in essentially experienced world. And this possibility of experiencing the world is universal to all people. However, this landscape can be experienced in various ways. And this phenomenological perspective, although includes the visual experience of the world, also opens up to the potential of other senses. And I really like this example by Alfred Gell, an anthropologist who researched the society of Umeda at Papua New Guinea. And he discovered that in this community, hearing and smell are much more reliable means of sensing distance and proximity than sight. Because, for example, when the first group of Umeda ever reached the coast, they perceived the sea horizon as a vertical wall of water. Because while living in a dense forest, they simply were not taught to orientate themselves based on visual features. So this example, in my opinion, shows that the paradigm of vision in Western societies is historically and socially coded. It has very deep roots, for example, in the philosophy of Descartes, who identified sight as the noblest and most comprehensive of the senses. And for example, Hegel championed it as the aesthetic sense. And there was even this 19th century scholar who identified taste and smell as primitive and animalistic. This 19th century scientist Lawrence Oken said that there is a racial hierarchy of the senses in which the European was an eye man whose primary sense of cognition is vision. And such hierarchy of the senses inscribes some structures of power and value and is placing non-Europeans at the bottom. So it leads to the conclusion that that the Western sensorium and modernity is embedded within the colonial and national nexus of power. And I think such bias is quite prominent in archaeology, in which especially landscape studies are mostly based on material aspects. Visual features are considered to be either fossils or palimpsests. Also, the documentation and methods of data presentation rely mostly on visualizations ranging from maps and plans, drawings, photographs, 2D and 3D models, some graphs, diagrams, or tables. Although we often use touch in archaeological exploration, sight is still used for the analytical purposes. So going back to the title of this presentation, I would like to explain my understanding of ontology. In my research, ontology asks very basic questions of what is the landscape, what are its features and components. And in order to answer these questions, we are moving within epistemology, So how can we learn about the landscape? Which leads us to theoretical approaches. So what approaches, what ideas can help us gain this knowledge? And so in this case, I'm mostly relying on phenomenology and new materialism, postmodern approaches. And the last component are the methods. So what tools can we use to get this knowledge? And there are different, very different tools, very different methods. For example, spatial data collection and analysis methods such as GIS or 3D modeling, but also some ethnographic methods. And the variety of ontological approaches inspired me to take a critical look at the issues related to the perception of the landscape. And I got inspired especially by the ontological turn that moves away from focusing solely on epistemology and the notion according to which people get to know the world in different ways. Instead, according to the ontological turn, the differences in the perception of the world are understood not as differences in worldview, but as equally important different worlds. But of course, such an approach raises new questions. So what kind of world are we trying to explore now? How aware are we of our limitations? Are we trying to reconstruct the world of people from the past? Or are we rather creating a new one? So all of these are rhetorical questions. I don't have any specific answers yet. I would like also to mention the issue of the so-called absent subject in archaeology. So in the contrary, in anthropology, it is possible to observe specific relationships between humans and non-humans, while in archaeology, we are only working with things and material traces of the deceased's actions. And the landscape ontology can include the considerations on the dynamics of relations between humans and non-humans, but it is also a discussion on the definition of the landscape, on how such landscapes exist, or what kinds of beings are they, what entities are involved in them. So I would like to take a look at some ontologically different worlds, such as some indigenous, local, and archaeological interpretations. Yes, so I distinguish these four elements, the past ontologies that we are maybe somehow trying to learn, relying on the archaeological data. Then we have some indigenous comparisons or some indigenous data that we often refer to. And then there is this element of the contemporary ontologies that are shared by today's inhabitants of the landscape, for example, the landscape of the Dewil Valley. And then there are the ontologies that appear in the archaeological research that are related to particular worldviews and theoretical approaches. So I will start with some indigenous ideas, and I will focus on the Tagbanua ethnic group. although there is no direct record of them be living in the past in the Dewil Valley. But I just wanted to use this example to not as a direct record of the beliefs in the Dewil Valley, but rather as an inspiration to look at the landscape in an alternative, maybe more complex way, to show this whole complexity, ontological complexity, and present some ideas and some concepts. I will just introduce some chosen concepts and then try to analyze it a bit. For the Tagbanua, there is no simple dualism of the universe, conception of the world. There is no differentiation between the humans and deities worlds, and these two worlds pervade the human universe, and also the world of the living is inhabited by Diwata and some other spirits. And Diwata inhabits specific places in the landscape, such as forests, mountains, rivers, or sea, which is full of powerful spirits who affect the weather, but can be even dangerous to the Tagbanua. This is why the community members applied a whole set of social practices. For example, they are afraid of big trees, and they are scared to cross the stream or sleep on the beach. It is also believed in terms of the status of the Tagbanua, that each Tagbanua has a true soul called, among others, Kurudwa, and 5 secondary souls in different parts of the body that protect the person from some diseases and wounds. And this Kurudwa is given to a Tagbanua in the moment of the birth. And the way of death affects what happens to the Tagbanua after death. For example, they can end up in an underworld that resembles the world of the living, but everything is inverted there. And in some specific situations, after 7 deaths in the underworld, Tagbanua can return to the world of the living, transformed into animals that are not edible and do not eat rice or green plants. So animals such as flies, frogs, or snakes. And moreover, the ancestral dead are causal agents, and they may cause, for example, sickness, but they can also help with good harvest. So these examples, in my opinion, show that world of the Tagbanua is full of living entities that inhabit also the inanimate parts of the landscape. But can these inanimate parts of the landscape possess some agency? As Robert Fox documented in his book, Tagbanua collect certain specific items, specific things that are treated as some kind of amulets or charm stones, and they are called motia. It means a precious stone or a pearl, and they have some varying degrees of power, and they are manipulated to control some situations fraught with uncertainty. So, for example, some of these objects can make you invisible. Fox also mentioned some archaeological artifacts, which was very interesting. For example, glass beads, stone polish adzes, or Chinese stoneware jar that were believed to be magical. For example, they were indestructible. And the what is worth mentioning, the power of Mutya does not come from the objects themselves, but is rather connected to the specific social status and ritual power of the owner. So trying to sum up all of these concepts I've told you about, I think that in these elements of the Tagbanua ontology presented before show us that there are completely different categories of actors than in European theoretical approaches. Because in the recent European theoretical approaches, we would mostly hear about humans, non-humans, animals, and things. But in the Tagbanua cosmology, some animals personify deceased ancestors, such as snakes and frogs, but some other have purely pragmatic meanings, such as pigs. Another example is rice, which is considered to be a sacred crop, a divine gift, and a proper meal for the humans and the Diwata. However, on the other hand, a sweet potato and cassava have no deeper meaning. So we can say that the subjectivity and agency and this power is rather multi-dimensional and complex. So perhaps we should use the term of ambivalent ontology that would indicate this lack of ontological stability and an observation that the agency may be modified by some social practices, for example. So another ontological concepts I wanted to talk about a bit are the contemporary ontologies shared by the local inhabitants. As I said before, there's no direct documented link between the Tagbanuas and the contemporary inhabitants of the Dewil Valley, because the recent population are mostly internal migrants from neighboring Cuyo and Panay Islands. And these groups started to settle down in the Dewil Valley in the 1960s during the internal migration movement in the Philippines. And such diversity in the population also means that some of the beliefs of the local inhabitants are not very homogeneous and cannot be referred as to general. Even though I tried to document some beliefs through ethnographic interviews 3 years ago, and I was able to document several stories and local legends about beliefs in some entities, spirits, or ghosts that inhabit the Dewil Valley. One of the very common motives was that people are disappearing or they are going missing under very mysterious circumstances. So it's very common that someone disappeared, went somewhere to the forest and was never found back, or was found after several days or even weeks, thanks to some certain rituals that were made, or the help of some spiritual guides. So there's a record of duendes, encantos, but another interesting kind of being inhabiting the valley are the ghosts of the deceased people buried near the caves so at the archaeological sites. And one of the people I talked to told me that before the archaeological research began, the local inhabitants did not know about the existence of the cemeteries there. So only with the discovery of the burials made by archaeologists, did they learn that there are some spirits of the dead that live in the caves of the karst formations. And another interesting element of the discourse in the Dewil Valley are the local names of the elements of the landscape. Some names appear in very different contexts, and they are understood differently by various local inhabitants. Some of them suggest that the karst towers may have served a specific purpose and had a distinctive function in the past, but others just allude to the physical conditions or the material and visual elements of those locations, such as the shape of the cave or some sensory experience of the cave, the smell of the cave, some atmospheric conditions at the site, etc. And let's get to the next parts, which is a completely another ontological worldview, which is created by archaeologists. So maybe I will just quote a short description of the Dewil Valley landscape. So we could describe it as a plain located in the northern part of the Palawan Island, which is covered with the rainforest, rice fields, banana groves, and small settlements. And there is a meandric river of Dewil that crosses the valley and flows into the Sulu Sea. And a very distinctive features of this physical landscape are these single limestone formations, which are scattered through the valley area. And they have the relative height of 20 to 40 meters, and most of them contain caves, crevices, shelters, and rock clefts. But I think this description of the Dewil Valley only refers again to the visual and physical realms of the landscape, and itself includes some elements of classification and evaluation, because a certain status was imposed to the rock formations, making them a distinctive and a very meaningful object of archaeological interpretation. However, this way of studying the landscape seems to be very, let's say, intuitive for the researchers who are embedded in this archaeological tradition. So there are many interpretations and visions created by the researchers. My approach actually, I try to draw some inspiration from the theories popular in contemporary humanities, such as actor network theory, new materialism, or temporality of the landscape. And some of these approaches try to open up for the potential of interpretative potential of the indigenous ontologies. For example, one of the key claims of the post-human theory is a non-anthropocentric epistemology, the rejecting of the Cartesian dualism of the world, and extending the subjectivity and agency to non-human entities such as animals and things. So in this case, in the case of the Tagbanua, Such approaches allowed the inclusion of Diwata and other spirits as dynamic, liable, and causative actors that are involved in all kinds of relationships. One of a very suggestive theoretical concept was presented by Elizabeth Povinelli, who investigated the case of a rock formation called Two Women Sitting Down, which is a sacred month for Australia's Kunapa people. This site was destroyed by a mining company and the extraction of manganese. And Povinelli asks a very provocative question: can rocks die? And this slogan draws attention to some indigenous ontologies and their very serious consequences for perceiving heritage. And Povinelli shows that through notion of some power called geonto power, it is not enough to merely recognize non-Western or indigenous ontologies. We must engage with the consequences and implications of their erasure and capture by Euro-American supremacist or colonial actors. And we must reckon the foundational violence of the first imposition of the life, non-life binary upon myriad worlds, existence, assemblages, and peoples. So this issue shows that using indigenous and local ontologies has more than just an interpretative potential. It may also have a moral dimension and can contribute to certain extent to the decolonization of archaeology by applying some native concepts, using some local terms to describe certain phenomena, or simply giving some voice to the local community by including parts of their interpretation into the scientific discourse. So I would like to end up with some even more questions. Although the above mentioned concepts allow acknowledging the recent indigenous knowledge and beliefs, are they really a response to the problems I presented in the introduction? Or are they, again, examples of how Western thought drives the interpretation? So the first problem already appears with the understanding of archaeological record and the questions of how can artifacts help us to interpret the perception of the landscape in the past and the meaning of its elements. And to what extent can we infer about past cosmologies from archaeological data, since archaeology is based on this Eurocentric paradigm? Aren't the archaeological data and sources also the result of Western thinking? And does such a way of conducting research open the field for reflection of non-Western ontologies? And also mentioning this example of some indigenous ontologies related to the Tagbanua community, I have presented the complexity and the ambivalent structure and nature of the ontology. And since these indigenous ontologies are so dynamic and ambiguous, can we capture similar dynamics in archaeology? Or maybe we perceive and statically present the past reality? Don't we somehow fossilize or aren't we fossilized by the archaeological data in this Eurocentric thinking? And are there any methods or ways to avoid this fossilization to some extent? And how would it affect the methodology, interpretations, or classifications? And then, is there any new quality in the research emerging from the confrontation of the archaeological data with the indigenous or local knowledge? And what could archaeology based on indigenous or local paradigm be like? And what would be the significance of landscape research? I am quite skeptical about the possibility of very positivistic interpretation of the past landscape ontologies, because I think that this postmodern theories I presented, although they provide a certain explanatory framework, they do not necessarily bring us closer to the way of thinking of people from the past. And I think that the archaeological narrative still reflects the mindset of the researcher with several assumptions and cultural determinants. 1 second, I just need some water. However, maybe an optimistic view at the end, while creating these interpretations, archaeology do not only undertake an academic discussion about the past, but also give some new meanings to the contemporary space and pass them to the local community. And a new discourse, new beliefs, new practices are created around these discoveries, although not always in line with what researchers believe. But perhaps this aspect, a deeper understanding of indigenous and local ontologies, can help in creating knowledge that would be more sensitive to the needs of the community. Thank you so much. That's all. So maybe I will show my face right now.
Thank you, Zuzanna. That was a really good talk, and I think a lot of people have questions as well. If anyone has any questions, you can raise your hand. You can press the reactions button at the bottom of your screen and press the raise hand button, or we can you can put your questions on the chat. We also welcome if you have anything that you want to add with the discussion, that will be also good. So, but in the meantime, while we go through all the chats, may I also ask? I think that was a very good start, and this is the beginning of your research. Am I correct? Okay.
Yes, very big.
I'm interested in this concept.
So,
oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
No. I have nothing to add.
No, okay.
You can continue with your question.
And based on your method, maybe I also missed this. You already did a lot of literature reviews and some beginnings of ethnographic data gathering in El Nido. Am I correct?
Yes, but it was very preliminary. Just a few days of interviewing, actually. Okay. So there is still a lot to learn.
And there's a question here, and maybe they missed it, but why Palawan and why El Nido and Dewil Valley specifically?
Well, I'm very grateful to Helen, Luis, and to Victor Paz for giving me the opportunity to participate in the project from the very early years of my studying. And somehow this landscape always inspired me, and somehow I always had some questions that I was asking myself. about the meanings, about this perception, about the discourse. So that's why I decided to investigate it more.
And I have a question with and when you were doing your research, you were talking mostly of the with the local people, but did you think to expand outside of not just within the community in the excavation area?
Oh yeah, I talked to archaeologists as well a lot, and I think it's also a very important part of this discourse that we are creating together somehow. But I'm thinking about expanding also a little bit, maybe to some people connected to tourism, for example, to some local authorities if there will be a chance, but maybe not this year.
All right.
This year I will focus.
All right. I have more questions, but I think Dr. Juan Rofes is raising his hand. Okay. All right. Oh, you're unmuted, Juan. Or you're on mute, Juan.
Now, can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Zuzanna, for your very interesting talk. So I got captivated. Sorry, I couldn't. Maybe you already explained this that I'm going to ask because I kind of could follow it up, from around the middle of it. But you were talking about this connection between landscape and at some point names, right? The landscape and the names given to them. So Dewil Valley to begin with, is Dewil connected to Diablo, to the devil? And if it's connected to the devil, why is that? Because I think Dewil, it's connected to that, right? It's because of a kind of curse. It means that it's a cursed valley, or have a different interpretation.
Okay, so I actually asked this question a lot of times already, and I think it's not actually connected to the devil, and a lot of people told me they simply do not know why is it called like this, but some told me that yes, it is because it is connected to the devil. And the story was that while the first migrants, first settlers from other islands came there, there were some places that were not really safe, and it was, yeah, maybe it was some kind of a cursed place. And it was already called the Valley of the Devil, but since it was not a good name, not a very encouraging name, let's say, they changed just this one letter, V into W. So that's how Dewil was created. But it may be a very secondary meaning, and many inhabitants have very different ideas about this roots of the names of the elements of the landscapes. So maybe we'll never know. Maybe we can just stick to some hypotheses, but I think it's not connected to devil, and it may be an older name, but of some unknown roots.
Okay. So that was really curious about thinking on that name. So I would like to add also another curiosity. So because you have been referring, and also connects to my own research and studies about folklore in the Philippines, about how the landscape is for the Filipinos up to now, maybe from very long in the past, it's very alive not just in the sense of plants and animals, but
Yes.
but mythical creatures, right? So there are a lot of, you were talking about the Iwata, that if I'm not wrong, it's the same as Anito in
Yeah.
Luzon,
Can be,
right?
yeah,
Or,
yeah.
or Encanto. So they are these creatures that really at some point, even Capre, know that they are connected to, they are sometimes seen as protectors or benefactors, and you have to even duende, right? You have talking about these goblins that live in the mounds, and you give offerings. So what it's, to your knowledge, and even maybe Victor or Helen, if they are around, can help on this. It's any evidence in the long chronology, in the long stratigraphy of Ile, could be related with any of these spirits, yet in any form of anyhow, or not yet. That's my question.
I don't think so, but to tell you the truth, I don't have enough knowledge yet to answer these questions, but maybe someone will help.
Actually, I was also going to expound on that question as well for Juan, but I think that Dr. Victor Paz is raising his hand, and you can also turn on your camera, Dr. Paz, and also Juan.
Hello, Zuzanna. Thanks for the talk, and thanks for sharing this the direction of your research. I know you're going to the field soon, and you're going to spend a lot of time. I just want to say that I think there's so much potential in what you want to do, the theoretical part of it. So just always remember that while you're doing it, you're contextualizing it in Dewil Valley. Your end game really is to contribute theoretically in discourse concerning landscapes. And because that's the objective, when you do finally synthesize what you plan, what you conclude and you argue, I think the workable landscape will be the island Southeast. So whatever theoretical argument you distill from your actual research is that you must think that is this going to be applicable, or at least you can see if you can apply it even just as a example, just as an illustration to other parts of island Southeast Asia. So that's the the other thing that you should do, early synthesis of ethnographers in the Pacific, especially in the Bismarck Archipelago, and they have done a couple of interesting work on the landscape. I just recently went back and read a couple of them. But the crucial part here, I think you should also quiz your informants, and when you go there and observe, is the concept of ownership. And you see the concept of ownership is crucial also in the interaction of people, from private ownership, collective ownership, state ownership. Is there a difference? And that's a big difference now, no? Between collective ownership, state, and in your rubric of past ontologies, you perhaps can contribute there, but definitely in the documented ontologies, you will maybe find echoes of that. And of course, while you're out in the field, you'll be able to tease out the contemporary ontology. But ownership, I think, is central to your concern in trying to create this. So again, but then caution also, while we don't want to be positivist too much, what we do have to have a baseline, like those descriptive, like your introduction of that description. We need that, no? Or else we will swing to the other side of too much relativism. and I don't think you would like that. So it has to be something that is still anchored. So I think you should look into that. And then several caves are meaningful and are connected to a lot of folklore, but they don't have names. No, not like in other parts of in other caves where they associate a certain kind of creature or entity to that cave. In the Dewil Valley, you don't have that. But here is another thing, Zuzanna. You go and look at the place names, no? And you see there are several. The most common place names, the most recent, brought by the Panay community families, are place names that are named after bird's nest collectors, no, like Paredes name, Venus Cave, etc. But then you have two levels again for the cars in the caves, right? For example, Ile is a very old name, and Ile is a refuge. It's an Austronesian term, right?
From
You
Iliman.
got, then Diribungan is a place for healing, right? Istar is house, no? Dwelling, and those are large cars formation. But then I've never really managed to make it clear, but you have to go and look at the linguistics of it. And are these Kuyon words, Tagbanua words? Are they Batak words, no? And or are they words that are commonly used in all those three languages? And if you can tease that out clearly, Sinalakan, a place where the sun, Makangit is still not clear what it is, no? So, but if you can clear that up, then you have another level of understanding of ontology of the landscape. I think that's something you can easily pursue, not easily, but at least excitingly pursue while you're out in that horrible place called El Nido. No? In that you're staying in this place called Leo, right? Oh, it's a dump, Leo. Yeah. So well, exciting. Good luck. And if you have other questions, we're just here, and literature that you need, and of course the network is there for you. They know you, they like you there. So
yeah, for sure, I will ask for more literature on the ownership if there are any references, because it never came across my mind.
So connected ownership is property, right? Concept of property, ownership, private, collective, and if like for example, it took us 15 years before, or at least 10 years before the Libunan family accepted that the tower itself and 50 meters is not theirs, right? That's state property. But then, what is state property? They don't have I don't think they have a articulated concept of collective property remaining, but I may be mistaken, you see, right? So it's good to understand that better, right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that would be very important. Yeah, thank you so much for these suggestions. I will follow them.
I also wanted to expound on what you were mentioning about the concept of ontologies and the sources of it. And Dr. Paz already mentioned that to look into the island Southeast Asian practices, and if it can be practiced it can be seen within the island Southeast Asian practice. And also maybe it's also nice to look at we go back to the Austronesian the language, the practices, and the belief system of a lot of the Austronesian practices of the Austronesian communities, and it will probably give you some concept of time in the long durée of it. Maybe not in a very, very long chronology, but it will at least give you some framework on how to work on how this can be connected with it. So instead of just looking at the of course, it's very important to contextualize it within the local landscape, but knowing that there is always a lot of do you call it, people who are transferring from one place to another. Knowing that there was also a lot of intensified migrations over the years, and that can contribute to parts of what you are might be looking at. And again, you also emphasize that this is trying to look at it in the archaeological is a big undertaking, but I think it's you can manage to make it work. We already have the resources in the linguistics part. You have a lot. You've done a lot on the folklore part, so that's something that could be interesting.
Yes,
yes.
for sure. There are some little bits and fragments of the puzzle.
Dr. Paz would like to speak again.
So Zuzanna, I like that, you know, you gave an illustration in the issue about the agency of landscapes and rocks, right? That quote, can rocks die, right? So yes, okay. So I think it's correct, and this is something you can quiz in. You see, you're interested in a time scale, time depth that is not really commonly asked by ethnographers, no? And so you really have a nice window here to push, no, and to contribute. The you know, the same with the same question: do objects die? Objects and landscapes change meaning and value, no? So because they change meaning and value, as you put in the time depth, right? Certain just take Ile cave itself, right? For the longest time, people were afraid to go there until a generation of bad boys, no, started hanging out there and drinking, no? And then we started our project. So it lost that kind of mystique, no, and its value. But then still, some of them are afraid to go there, right? But only a few of them. And then there's also ethnography very early in Mindanao. I forgot her name. She was a pioneer woman ethnographer, American, and she documented with Faye Cooper Cole. I think Faye Cooper Cole also got the same. In order for people to sell objects to the American anthropologists for their collection to bring home, they had to rationalize it. And the way they rationalize it is that they either say they lost value because it's broken, or it didn't serve its original purpose, and then they sold what used to be a very valuable and ritual laden object can then be sold or given away, you know. And then there's also a practice of if you have a santo, a saint, right, and it broke a bit and it's broken, so there's a ritual of burying them, no? So it changes. It's not forever, no? So there's also connected to this and with the landscape is inheritance, no? So the and the issue now, the Dewil Valley, it's crazy when it comes to inheritance, no? And the selling of property, etc. But that's all connected. So anyway, so yes, landscapes change value, meaning through time, and then as you go through the contemporary, documented, and past ontologies, then you can see, you can come up with your bright conclusions.
Yeah, so it's one of the challenges. I wanted to also stress it, that these ontologies are dynamic, changeable, not static, and therefore that's a challenge to conceptualize it, and like which point of time should we focus on, and maybe many points of time. So I will be thinking about it.
Yeah.
But thank you very much for this.
I also wanted to ask, or maybe this is still not being, maybe to expound on what you mentioned earlier. What what timeline or what part of the Dewil Valley archaeology are you going? Do you think you might be interested in?
I'm not really thinking about getting into some point of time in the past, but probably my research will be more focused on the today's perception, and therefore maybe this landscape could be defined as a heritage, as a landscape heritage, cultural heritage, or something like that. So yeah, so I'm not really, I don't really have any time, something like that.
It might have been lost on me because my connection was a bit slow, but yeah, so not
Okay.
more on the but I got there's not much on the chronologies. But speaking of that, there's a master's thesis, and maybe you've already read this by Linel Linel.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Because
and you've yeah, DiCaprio, and you've already met, so you can also build upon that the framework that you also did. That's also a good perspective as well. And looking at it in a heritage perspective, and it's really just it's not just, but it's really the changing concept of landscape perception, which is, I think it's actually, it would be interesting to see it's done in this in a longer chronology, I think. I'm sure there are other questions. May I ask, when do you plan to go to start your field work in
on
Anida?
Friday.
Okay, all
On
right.
Friday.
Well, we caught you right on time. So you'll only be here for a few days. Okay. Oh,
Sorry, Zuzanna, were you around when we
Yeah.
formulated that heritage landscape concept for the Dewil Valley? So that is pushing on. The barangay has already embraced it, made a decision. So we're pushing it at municipal level. But the concept of the heritage landscape will be interesting. Well, I'll be interested to see what, after you've sunk your teeth not deep into this issue of landscapes. How does it play, right, with, or how can we improve on it in the advocacy of transforming that entire, and of course it is defined not just the valley, it includes the mangrove forest, and it includes Imorige. So that's the heritage landscape. That and it's not it's not an eco park, it's not a geopark, it's not a reserve, right? It is something else. If I should give you a copy of our concept paper for that, so then you can engage it.
and it would be good that you can talk to
Yeah,
the principal level too. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I will be still working on the definitions and how to conceptualize the heritage itself, which has so many definitions and there are so many approaches. So, yeah. Sorry, I can't hear you right now.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I was on mute. My apologies. Okay. I think there's a lot of things to unpack here, not just for you, but also for other people. But oh, there's another question here. Maybe ask your the guest to. You can also turn on your video, and you're already unmuted. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm sorry I do not have a camera. Let me introduce myself. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, let me introduce myself. I am a supervisor of Zuzanna. I am from Poznań University. So first, what I would like to say, thank you very much for supporting Zuzanna. So thank you very much for giving her an opportunity to have a talk to people who are much more familiar with the situation in Philippines, with the landscape, archaeology and anthropology in Philippines. I'm very grateful that what I've already heard, that you are open for these strange ideas we frequently discuss in the seminar in Poznań. I expect that Zuzanna will work very hard, and with your support, she will reach a lot of success. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
We're very happy to have Zuzanna here. She's been hardworking with surveys for the past few years, especially with Dr. Victor Pass as well, and Helen Lewis, who I think she was having problems in entering the Zoom. Thank you, and I think Zuzanna, you're all set with this. I was also I'm very interested in how this is going to play up in the concept of anthropology and archaeology. We're all very interested in landscapes and understanding how landscapes are perceived, not just in the for me, it's always the long the chronologies, the long period. So that would be interesting to see what will happen in your project. And I'm hoping that you can also present this again, at least the beginnings of your findings probably when the year ends, or when you come back soon. We'll have it on probably online, and then or again in through face to face. And then we're always very happy to discuss this. A lot of there are also some people from Palawan State University who are here, and they were very interested in your talk. So they'll probably be emailing you or contacting you as well. Ate Mimi from Dewil Valley was also interested. I'm not sure if she managed to log in, but we'll be happy to provide the recording with her. So you already have her contact as well. So hopefully
Yeah.
you can, okay, and hopefully you can get those information. So just wanted to say I think that Faye Cooper Cole is a male. So just as far as I remember reading. But he also did a lot of surveys, not just in the north, not just in Mindanao, but also he did a lot of ethnographies at the south, and that I'm sure you've also gone through his works. Very good books that he produced, and they're all freely available for people who might not be familiar with Faye Cooper Cole's work. It's currently available online through Project Gutenberg, including the photos that he published. So it would be an interesting way to go through the perspectives of anthropologists in the Philippines 100 years ago. Okay. All right.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
these suggestions, for all the comments.
Thank you for sharing your work. We're very happy to hear about it, and we hope that we can invite you again. Okay. And would you like to say anything else?
No, just maraming salamat po, and we'll see each other around probably.
All right. We definitely will, since we're just neighbors right now. Okay. Thank you, and thank you to everyone who attended the talk. I'm sure there's a lot of questions. You can contact Zuzanna through if you're here in ASP. Feel free to just chat with her. She will be here until Thursday, but she will be going to El Nido on Friday. But for next week, our BINALOT talks will be another research fellow of ASP, Dr. Max Findley from the Max Planck Institute. He will be giving a talk by next week regarding the research that he and his team of the Panthropocene team are currently looking into. So see you all. Please look at or like our Facebook page, the BINALOT Talks, or you can check out the UPASP Facebook page or also our website. And we will all see you next week. But for now, we would like to thank Zuzanna for this very good talk. I really like your the engagement and and we're excited to hear more about what you are going to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And